Hi everyone, it's Wednesday, June 10th, and this is the dispatch for the week. We are trying something different now. Instead of doing dispatches every day of the week, I'm going to do one dispatch a week on Wednesday morning, and we'll try to walk through all of the readings for that week and any updates that are relevant at that time. So that's the plan. We'll see how it goes. This, over the last few months, has been my first experience really spending time with the daily lectionary readings. So I'm getting used to the flow of these readings and understanding how they're constructed. So we're sort of figuring this out together in a lot of ways. One of the things that happens this week, I noticed, is a transition. Today marks the end of one period in the daily lectionary readings, and tomorrow marks the start of a new period. And tomorrow it's sort of like a fork in the road, and we choose what's called the complementary lectionary or the semi-continuous lectionary. For what it's worth, we're going to go in the semi-continuous direction because it looks to me like what that means is that at least our Old Testament readings will follow a little bit more in a linear fashion, meaning we'll stay with certain texts and stories for a longer period of time, so we can actually get the stories as we go through these readings. So, for whatever that's worth, that's where we're headed. Our psalm for the first half of the week is Psalm 29, and it's a psalm about the awesome voice of the Lord, the power of God, and what God accomplishes just by speaking, which of course ties directly into Job. We're finishing up God's first speech from the whirlwind. This is God essentially reprimanding Job for even daring to question God. And God is with that awesome voice declaring God's own power and knowledge and experience and so forth, at the end of which Job says, "See, I am of small account. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand on my mouth." Job opts to be silent in the face of this awesome voice of God. So then after that break, after we take the fork in the road and move into that semi-continuous part of the lectionary, we enter the story of Abraham in Genesis. We start a little bit far along in that story. It's not the beginning of Abraham's story, but really it's near the end. So we begin with the arrangement of the marriage between Isaac, the son of Abraham, and Rebekah. So Abraham and Sarah had Isaac in their old age. Isaac was the son of God's promise to them. And then, of course, Rebekah and Isaac will marry and continue the story, continue the people of Israel. And that is the beginning of their story. So then we go to the New Testament, and I think I can sort of categorize these New Testament readings, put them in two buckets, and the first is the Holy Spirit. We have in 1 Corinthians a passage that talks about varieties of gifts that the Spirit gives to the church, and this language we actually use when we do our ordination services, usually once a year. We talk about the many gifts that have been poured out upon the church, and that the way these gifts are importantly used in different ways for the good of the church, for the good of God's kingdom. And this is the work of the Holy Spirit among us. In John 14, we have just a couple of verses, but one word is actually very important. Jesus says that the advocate will come. And that word advocate in Greek is Paraclete, which maybe you've heard before, maybe you haven't. It's an odd word, and it actually is the first century word for attorney or lawyer. Imagine that. So what Paraclete means is advocate, or it means advisor or comforter. The role of the Holy Spirit is manifold, and so we sort of get a sense of that in this unique word. It means helper. It means encourager. The Holy Spirit will come to be alongside us like an advocate, like someone who speaks on our behalf in a court of law, someone who is there for us. That is what the Holy Spirit is, and Jesus is promising what the Holy Spirit will do when the Paraclete comes. The second bucket for these New Testament readings is the figure of Moses, and the different ways that Moses enters into the vocabulary and the imagination of the New Testament. In Hebrews, Jesus is compared to Moses, but Jesus is one step above Moses. In Acts, we go back to that lengthy speech of Stephen, where Stephen is retelling the story of the people of Israel, and here it's his focus on Moses. And there's an implicit connection to Jesus because you have the people of Israel who didn't listen to Moses, and now in the time of the New Testament, the Jews who did not listen to Jesus. That's where Stephen is headed. And then finally, in Mark chapter 7, this is a very obscure sort of conversation that Jesus has with the Pharisees about what's called the traditions of the elders. And best I can tell, we're talking about certain dietary restrictions. We're talking about ritual observations. In this case, particularly, it is the washing of hands, the washing of other things. There was one thing that I really loved reading. It says, they do not eat, meaning they who observe the tradition of the elders, they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it. I wonder if you've been washing your groceries when you bring them home. A little bit of a connection between the New Testament and the age of COVID-19. In any case, Jesus is questioning their religious observances, saying they've taken them too far. And he says, he introduces this idea of Corbyn, which is an act of dedicating something to God, which sounds good, right? I'm giving this over to God. It's Corbyn. It's dedicated to God's use. Well, Jesus is accusing the Pharisees of dedicating their monetary resources to God so they don't have to support their aging parents, and they fail to keep the fifth commandment of Moses. So that is a little bit of what's happening here, but Moses enters into that conversation again because Moses is the giver of the law. And Jesus is not wanting to push Moses aside. Jesus wants to hold to the law, but in the way that the law intended, not the way that the Pharisees have taken it too far. Couple quick updates for the week. This coming Sunday is our Youth Takeover Sunday. We have done this every year for the last several years, and it's always a surprise and always lots of fun. It's going to be different, of course, because we're not in the sanctuary together. No beach balls passed around the pews this time, but I'm sure it will be wonderful. So make sure you join us Sunday morning for our Youth Takeover. We have a task force that has already begun its work and will continue that work as quickly as we can, that is working to determine how and when we can safely reopen the building, the sanctuary for worship and fellowship. So please stay tuned. We will continue to share information as we have it. That task force will make recommendations to session. Ultimately, the session will be the ones to make the decision about how and when we can safely reopen the church. And then finally, if you didn't hear the good news on Sunday morning, the elevator is working. So as soon as you're in that building again, I'm excited for you to be able to make use of that. The space is changing. We've got some furniture and more still to come. So we're very excited to get life back something closer to normal. I hope you're having a great week. We will see you Sunday morning. Have a great day.